We take a look at the repression faced by Telesur's team in Chile at the hands of the police. Bolivia's de facto government issues an arrest warrant for deposed President Evo Morales. And fans at the Spanish football league's renowned El Clasico match rebel in support of Catalonian independence. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo. This is From the South. This week, Telesur's team in Chile were the direct victims of police repression, an unfortunate event that showcased how little tolerance security forces have towards journalists who are working to show the reality of the situation in the South American nation 60 days after massive anti-government protests started.
On Monday, December 16th, the Special Police Task Force had orders to stop all protest by any means necessary, restricting mobility and people's right to demonstrate.
We have strategies to maintain control. We are on top of the issue.
Hundreds of carabineros were deployed beginning at 3 p.m. on Monday. The recommendations of the UN, which said that the government must facilitate peaceful demonstrations and reduce their use of force, were blatantly ignored. The police didn't set up barricades, they did not stop traffic, they simply began repressing anyone who would pass by the area, using toxic water on cyclists, giving a fine to a driver who was giving out water to protesters, and eventually they targeted Telesur's team. Our team was located by the Mapocho River on top of some stairs. The story we were working on was not about the police. We were talking about a possible referendum and the recent discovery that the water used on protesters had tested positive for toxic material.
Vamos a escuchar lo que dijeron parte de los profesionales que participaron del estudio.
But in a matter of seconds, just as our story was being broadcast, this happened to us.
Mira cómo se nos acercan. Mira, nos van a mojar. No nos permiten seguir con el despacho al aire. Pero me están
And it didn't end even when we went back on air.
¿Me puede dar una explicación porque no puedo terminar?
La orden era desalojar.
They ordered us to leave when it was obvious we were live, but they didn't care. They kicked us, they laughed at us and mocked us. It was a large group of police.
But we were not the only ones. Health workers who aid protesters on the front line were also targeted by the carabineros.
We are here to help everyone, but the police is attacking us with toxic water as if we were criminals, throwing gases and repressing us.
An alleged defense of democracy by repressing people and controlling public spaces. 2 months into the protests, this brings memories of the darkest years of Chile.
Las Fuerzas Armadas y de Orden han actuado en el día de hoy solo bajo la inspiración patriótica.
Paren, por favor deténganse. Señora, por favor, por favor, de verdad, algo de cordura. Chao, que estén bien.
The de facto government of Bolivia has issued an arrest warrant against the deposed President Evo Morales. Morales is accused of alleged sedition, terrorism, and financing of terrorist activities. This is the latest move by the de facto government to try and keep Morales out of Bolivia as new presidential elections are expected. Morales was forced to flee Bolivia on November 12th after a successful coup by the country's right wing. On Wednesday, the UN General Assembly recognized the Bolivarian government led by President Nicolás Maduro as the only legitimate representative of Venezuela. The Venezuelan ambassador to the UN, Samuel Moncada, had this to say about the decision.
Today is a day for celebration in Venezuela. The UN General Assembly has just accepted the credentials of the Bolivarian government as the only legitimate representative of Venezuela. The United Nations is the most important intergovernmental organization in the world, made up of 193 countries, nearly the entire international community. And today, by consensus, They recognized President Nicolás Maduro as the only legitimate leader of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Venezuela's oil production is increasing again despite the economic and financial blockade imposed by the United States. Figures ratified by the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries show that crude production in Venezuela climbed from 644,000 barrels a day in September to 687,000 in October, and more sharply to 920,000 barrels a day in November. After falling to historic lows, the oil ministry says its measures to stabilize production are taking effect. More than 50 intellectuals from Latin America and beyond have gathered in Venezuela to analyze the recent protests against neoliberalism across the region.
Protests in Ecuador, Chile, Colombia, and Haiti, and the political processes in Mexico, Argentina, Bolivia, and Venezuela have made for an intense year in 2019, one that raises big questions and challenges ideas that many took for granted. Analyzing all of this is the task that several dozen intellectuals set themselves at this 3-day meeting in Caracas.
Para dilucidar, para esclarecer.
To understand and clarify this historic movement in our continent, we need to develop ideas and proposals for a plan of actions in defense of humanity.
Venezuela has often hosted debates of this kind. The country is a point of reference for social struggles. Its people have resisted many attempts to overthrow the Bolivarian government, and the Bolivarian example is at the center of these debates.
The winds of Bolivarian change have a historical precedent in Haiti, which in turn is again in revolt against neoliberalism, against the huge cost that imperialism has imposed on the people of Haiti. Seminars like this allows us to identify the historical roots of the current struggles of our peoples, and to see that in our own history we have the keys that allow us to overcome the current challenges.
4 or 5 years after the return of right-wing governments, or in those countries where the right never left, the suffering and poverty of the people brought by neoliberalism have only gotten worse. These are policies that maximize the accumulation of capital and the concentration of wealth, creating huge inequalities with disastrous consequences.
Intellectuals from different disciplines, political activists, and academics, like this economist, the winner of the Award for Critical Thought, agree that 2019 marks a turning point for the continent.
We are once again facing a moment of intense dispute in Latin America, which will decide whether the right and the coup-mongers win, those who want to reassert neoliberal adjustment and imperial domination, or whether the people and the progressive left organizations, those who are fighting in the streets, will triumph.
The popular struggles in the region are generating a new set of ideas, both for research and for political action.
We move to Brazil now, where health and education workers protested outside Rio de Janeiro City Hall, demanding that Mayor Marcelo Crivella pay their salaries. On Monday, City Hall suspended all payments and financial transactions until further notice. But that decision has dealt a major blow to Rio's healthcare system, as doctors and nurses have been on strike for a week, demanding the payment of months of late salaries.
I'm angry with this administration. I'm very upset because this has never happened before. So it's not up to us to manage. It's up to us to do what's best to keep the city growing. And Mayor Crivella is not solving anything.
The Colombian Senate has delayed its vote on President Iván Duque's tax reform. He has been one of the main targets of a national strike that has rocked the country in recent weeks. The Senate is now expected to vote on the bill on Wednesday.
A reform that clearly benefits a very small group in Colombia, and a group that helped finance the election campaigns of President Iván Duque and the parties that support him. It's not surprising that many think those lawmakers are now paying back the favor.
If you look at where the money for those campaigns came from, for those parties and candidates who are now voting in favor of this reform, you'll find that it came from the same groups who are now lobbying members of Congress for the favor to be repaid.
The last step for this reform to become law will be before the full Senate. There, 108 senators will vote either to defend the interests of workers and the poor or to give more power to the powerful by passing a measure that will give tax breaks to big business worth $2.7 billion.
They always tell us that the rich need tax breaks to create more jobs. It's a lie. As one Nobel laureate said, they are just giving money away to those already swimming in it and taking it from the poor. That is what neoliberalism has done all over the world, and that's why streets all over the world are now full of protest.
On Monday night, the lower house passed the reform with 89 votes for and 48 against. Some opposition senators accuse other lawmakers of passing legislation behind the backs of the people and the demands they are making in the streets.
This Congress has the very same attitude as President Duque. They are not listening to the population or to the demands put forward in the street demonstrations, which are no to the tax reform, no to more taxes, no to what they call the austerity package. More than a month of protests and strikes has not been enough to stop these measures, and that is very worrying.
Opposition senators from the Green Party, the Liberal Party, Colombia Humana and others will vote against the bill, but it is estimated that the reform is already ensured 56 votes in favour, which means in all probability it will become law.
We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Weekdays, only on Telesur. A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en la I.
Dotting the I. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
The president of Niger is assuring citizens that security will be heightened after the recent attack at a military camp near the border with Mali. During a televised speech, President Mahamadou Issoufou said the ambush, which saw 71 soldiers killed, will never happen again. He added that his government has already put security measures in place to ensure people's safety. Issoufou's guarantees come 3 days after G5 Sahel leaders met to discuss a plan to retaliate. It's been 2 weeks since the deadly incident.
We are at war. We are waging this war. It cannot be repeated enough. For a just cause, the defense of our nation and the integrity of our territory, and that is why we will win it. God willing, whatever time it takes.
The Guinean government has moved to ensure that all political players and citizens can prepare for 2020 elections peacefully. Local authorities have released opposition figures who led a strike against the new draft constitution that saw 2 months of demonstrations and 70 people dead. The government is also allowing citizens to march and take part in protests. Political parties are now focusing on planning for next year's polls.
We are still 2 months away from the parliamentary elections, and there are already accusations of fraud. The objective of this ongoing dialogue is precisely to review all the difficulties encountered in the process regarding the parliamentary elections, and, with the Electoral Commission, try to remove all obstacles to achieve an inclusive and transparent electoral process.
Zimbabweans continue to be upbeat in the face of economic hardships caused by extreme droughts and sanctions imposed by Western countries. Citizens have survived through aid and self-help projects. According to the United Nations, nearly half of Zimbabwe's 15 million population still faces chronic food insecurity. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food has also warned that Zimbabwe was on the brink of man-made starvation.
The project which DCA is implementing together with the World Food Programme is reaching out to 3,974 households, translating to 18,990 beneficiaries. And these are receiving $9 per month per person in a household, and the money is used to buy primarily food, just to improve food security.
Before this program, we were not having 3 meals per day, but we were only eating lunch and supper.
In Senegal, a protected baobab forest has been decimated by cement manufacturers who are quarrying more limestone to facilitate a construction boom. These activities have left open mines, dust clouds, and lorry traffic. Locals have complained that mining activity is crumbling their houses and damaging their health. President Macky Sall has since come under fire for his keen support of the local industry and his approval of the expansion of 236 hectares for cement maker Cement to Sahel in June.
Since the arrival of the quarries, there has been an increase in respiratory diseases. These include tuberculosis, asthma, respiratory infections such as pneumonia. It has really affected the villagers. It is a fact. The reports we send out show that there is an increase in these diseases.
Quarries cause dust by carrying sand to the population and not protecting them. At the very least, they should have put water in to keep the dust from rising, watering the roads, but they didn't.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Thousands of protesters gathered near Barcelona's Nou Camp Stadium on Wednesday to demand independence for Catalonia. Chanting independence and free political prisoners, the latest pro-independence protest took place just before Spain's most high-profile football match between Barcelona and Real Madrid. The game, known as El Clasico, had initially been scheduled to occur 2 months ago, but it was postponed due to unrest in Catalonia after Spain's Supreme Court sentenced 9 pro-independence leaders to up to 13 years in prison.
I am asking that Europe is listening to the voice of the Catalan people. And it is true that there are also Catalan people, they are for Spain, but I think at least the people who want to separate from Spain, to build up their own country, to give them a chance that they deserve it.
But despite efforts to censor protesters inside the stadium, from not allowing banners to prohibiting broadcasters from showing the pro-independence protest, citizens made their voices heard as thousands chanted for freedom. The recent move by the United States to sanction a Russian gas pipeline has been condemned as a violation of international law. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said U.S. sanctions against the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline are an example of unfair competition. The project was almost complete, but the U.S. Senate passed a defense policy bill which includes the imposition of sanctions on companies constructing the pipeline. The bill awaits final approval from President Donald Trump.
Moscow and its European colleagues, Paris and Berlin, do not like such actions. These actions are a direct violation of international law. They are the perfect example of unfair competition.
Tuesday marked 5 years since Cuba celebrated the return of the Cuban Five. The nation tuned into their television sets as the anti-terrorism intelligence officers were released from U.S. prisons and flown home after a 16-year struggle. The freeing of the Five was integral to the reopening of diplomatic ties under then Presidents Raúl Castro and Barack Obama. While in confinement, the U.S. attempted to get the men to renounce the revolution, but were never successful.
The Five are back. Thank you, Cuba. Thank you to our people for the struggle of so many years. They did not abandon us. Thank you, Cuba, for the bottom of our hearts. One thing that will never change is the unquestionable loyalty fidelity of the fight to our revolution, to our people, to Fidel, to Raúl, and to Díaz-Canel. Thank you very much to all of you. Long live the revolution. Long live Fidel.
These people bestowed upon them the distinction not only of heroes, but of admired sons who we are eternally grateful for their example and for having decided without any hesitation to place themselves on the side of duty and to put above their aspirations and personal dreams the greater interest of the good patriots, which is the defense of their country and their socialist revolution.
On December 17, 2014, Cuba and the United States announced the re-establishment of bilateral diplomatic relations after more than half a century of acrimony. 5 years later, what was meant to be a respectful and civil relationship has deteriorated under the administration of Donald Trump.
On the morning of December 17th, Telesur surprises Cuban hero Gerardo Hernandez at the Superior Institute of International Relations, Raul Roa. He's just been given a gift by the Foreign Ministry 5 years after his arrival in Cuba, following his release from prison in the U.S. and the announcement that Cuba and the United States had re-established diplomatic relations.
This was a day that our nation saw with great hope. It looked like for the first time in decades, our relationship with the U.S. was going to be led by common sense. We all thought that our dreams of respectful and civil relations with the U.S. were coming to pass, but little by little, the dream was undone.
This is the reality 5 years after global headlines touted the reopening of the U.S. Embassy in Havana, while the flag with the stars and stripes flies high near Havana's boulevard. There is barely any personnel entering or leaving the building. The park, where hundreds of Cubans used to wait for their visa requests, is now empty.
Over the past 5 years, we have seen a policy that looked too good to be true be turned down. This shows us that the U.S. decision in 2015 was never made in consensus with their own political elite.
Most recently, U.S. sanctions have become more severe. They're banning cruise ships from the U.S. to dock in Cuba, limiting remittances, persecuting oil ships that head to Cuba, and imposing laws that block foreign investment.
These are dangerous times, but they will soon pass, and it's not all Trump's fault. The recent attacks on Cuba come from the hands of Mauricio Claver Caroni, a Cuban-American who has a very important role in the U.S. National Security Council. He worked with Obama for a time and opposed all of Obama's policies regarding Cuba. He's an activist, not a diplomat, and he's the one implementing all of these sanctions and restrictions.
Experts say that the shift from subtle attacks to full-on Republican hostility brings the risk of a new break in relationships.
We're not going to die if tomorrow the United States dissolves diplomatic relations. Doing so would be harmful for Cuba, but more so for the United States.
It's a difficult circumstance that makes life more difficult for us, but I believe that Cubans know how to overcome. I believe that even in a sense, the traditional Trump aggressiveness is less dangerous than the more subtle attacks of the Obama era. Even though it's better to talk, dialogue is always the way to go.
Cuban government has said that it's ready for an eventual break of diplomatic relations with Washington, while highlighting that they don't wish for this. They're adding that it is possible to move forward toward a normal relationship with the U.S. government, but only on the basis of respect and equality.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Until next time.